What's going on, guys? Ben with liftedimports.com here, and today we're going to talk about off-roading in your Subaru and modifying your Subaru for different kinds of off-pavement activities. And specifically, we're going to talk about tires and tire selection. I know we've talked about this a little bit on the channel already, but I wanted to share in particular my experience with running a mud terrain. I just want to go over some of the reasons why you might want to run a mud terrain tire on your Subaru, and then maybe share some different pitfalls and some different things to expect, and then maybe share a few shopping tips for you. And then I'll just give you a brief rundown on a few mud terrain tire options that you may want to consider if you decide ultimately that it's something that you want to do. So we're going to jump in and talk about that, but first, if you want more information at your fingertips about lifting Subarus, about off-roading Subarus, head over to the liftedimports.com website. Got a lot of good content over there. There's a bunch of build features from people just like us that have already lifted their Subarus and are using them off-road. So you get some good inspiration from those and get some good ideas on how to build your Subaru. Also, if you have a lifted Subaru and you think it should be up on the website, don't hesitate to head over there, shoot us an email. I'd be happy to look at it and be excited to possibly put it up on the website for other people to enjoy and to draw inspiration from as they build their Subaru. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you what a mud terrain is. It's gonna be the first step in understanding whether or not it's the right move for you. And I've got a set of mud terrains here on one of my Subarus. Take a look. Now I'm running the Accelera MT-01. This is a mud terrain in a 235/75 R15. It's not very big by most standards, but for a Subaru, this is kind of on the larger size, what you would typically want to run. But what I want to point out is how heavy duty the tread blocks are on a tire like this. On a mud terrain, you're always going to have pretty large tread blocks with large voids in between them. So you're going to have these shoulder lugs on the outside. Then you're going to have your center tread blocks right here. And you're almost always going to find a lot of space in between each lug. Now, what that does is a couple things. Those wide voids, they allow your tire to evacuate any kind of terrain that you might pick up. So specifically mud, hence the name mud terrain, in order to retain grip while in muddy circumstances. The wide voids allow that mud to evacuate as the wheels spin. Now, mud does not stick to mud, so if you get your tires completely packed up with mud, you're basically running around on racing slicks out there in the forest, and you got to be able to get that mud out of there in order to regain traction. It's going to be the same thing with things like gravel. They're also going to be able to eject gravel and just dirt and things in general. That being said, ejecting things out of the tread is not always a good idea, or at least not optimal. So for example, when you're in deep snow, let's say you're off-road and you're wheeling in some deep snow, while mud terrains can still do pretty well, snow sticks to snow, and if you're evacuating it out from in between the tread blocks, you're missing out on a little bit of added traction that you might be able to hold on to. Now, of course, this is going to vary. There's going to be certain types of snow in different conditions that do just fine if you have completely clear treads. But I find that in light, powdery snow, those that I'm wheeling with that have all terrains versus mud terrains that can get the snow to pack into the tire, they actually do pretty good. But for everything else off-road, mud terrains are kind of the pinnacle of off-road performance. They work really well, but there are some downsides. One of the biggest downsides is going to be the fact that because of the wider tread voids, so the voids in between the tread blocks, they wear out substantially quicker than if you were running something like an all-terrain or an all-season. Because of that, if you are a person that daily drives your Subaru and you want to prolong the life of your tires, 10 out of 10, I would not recommend running a mud terrain if longevity and preserving your tire lifespan is something that is important to you. Now, you might be one of those people that just wants to run a mud terrain because you like the way they look and you like having that capability when it's needed. If that's you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You've heard me say before, I don't care if people want to modify their vehicles because of aesthetic purposes. I think that's totally fine. People are going to hate on you for it. There's going to be people out there that say function over form and blah, you know, all this stuff, and that's fine. But if you're a person that just wants to run mud terrains because you like them, be my guest. However, they do wear out quicker in most cases from pavement driving versus something with tighter tread blocks. The other thing that you're going to notice is because the tread blocks are not packed as tightly together, the tires are not going to be as stable or as responsive as, say, an all-season, which is probably what came on your Subaru when you bought it, or as an all-terrain. The fact that they're spread further apart is going to make them a little bit more loud on the highway or just on pavement in general. I don't personally mind the noise at all. It doesn't bother me one bit, but it is something to be aware of. If you're a person that's very concerned about tire noise, don't get mud terrains. Go get you a Tesla. But for the rest of us, if you want that performance, mud terrain's a good option. Now, the other thing that I like about a mud terrain, in addition to the fact that it gives great grip and control when you're off-road, is the fact that just all the way around, they're almost always going to be built with a little bit more of a heavy-duty carcass. The sidewalls are typically going to have more reinforcement and protection than, say, an all-terrain or definitely an all-season. And you'll notice here, if you take a look, see how all this stuff comes out. This is all pretty heavy duty. Even the lettering, you know, this sticks out probably a little over an 1/8 inch. Just in general, almost all mud terrain tires are going to have a substantially more heavy duty construction to them, which means a couple things. It means you're not going to just cut through sidewalls super easy when you're out there getting into sharp rocks, or if you accidentally run over some sort of object that would typically damage a tire, you may have zero problems. It might not puncture the tire all the way. You're also going to be able to air these tires down a little bit more than most other tires on the market. Now, not always, but in most cases, the sidewalls on a mud terrain are just going to be a little bit more heavy duty, which means that you can drop that tire pressure down and not worry as much about whether or not that's going to damage the sidewall and cause a blowout. I run these tires on low PSI all the time. I think I've had them down as low as probably like 5 to 8 PSI in the snow. No problem. No problem at all. Been running these things like crazy. Zero issues. Still love them. Now, being able to air down is something that you definitely want to be aware of and know how to do and be taking advantage of. It is probably one of the single most useful things when you're out on the trails. I will say that a person who has correct knowledge of how to air down, how much to air down, and when to air down in an all-terrain tire is probably going to be more successful on just about any kind of terrain than someone with a super aggressive mud terrain tire that doesn't know how to air down and just thinks that full pressure is what you should run all the time. The person with that knowledge is absolutely going to come out on top every single time. So regardless of what you ultimately choose, learn how to air down. Absolutely recommend it to everybody. Just be a little bit careful, make sure you know how to air back up, make sure you have a good understanding of how to reseat beads, how to repair tires, because it's just part of the game. Stuff will happen to the tires and you'll have to do field repairs. Now we kind of know some of the major benefits of mud terrains. We also know some of the downsides. What I want to do now is just give you a basic idea of what to look for if you're gonna go out and buy a mud terrain tire. Okay, so one of the first things that I would look out for is weight. You want to be careful with the tire weight. Now you're gonna have a hard time finding a non-LT mud terrain. That's gonna be the majority of what's out there is gonna be LT. So you're gonna have a harder time finding P versions of these same tires, but what I would look for ultimately is something that's not overly heavy. These tires, they weigh about 34 pounds a piece, and on my Subaru, that's kind of at the edge of where I wanna be. I don't ever wanna run a tire that's 40 pounds a corner on this. That would just be absolute overkill on a vehicle that's this small, and especially with a vehicle that doesn't have low range and has just basic gearing without a selectable T case to get down into 4 low. So one of the first pitfalls is going overboard with weight and not even taken into consideration. So make sure that you select a mud terrain that's going to do what you need it to do, but that's going to be one of the lighter mud terrains out of the options that you ultimately start looking at. Okay, one of the next things is not all mud terrains are going to be equal or designed for the exact same type of off-road driving. There's going to be some mud terrains that are very aggressive to the point where they really don't belong on the road. You're looking at things like super swampers and boggers and like the Accelera Batic or whatever that tire is called, that's just super aggressive. And basically what those are for is those are for cars that are not even going to be leaving the trails unless they're on a trailer. Now you can definitely drive them on the road, but that's not really what they're designed for. You definitely don't want to end up with a tire that's just so aggressive that they wear out super quick and completely deteriorate the driving experience. With a Subaru, you're not going to be doing anything that requires a full-on, just completely extreme mud terrain. I mean, you can run them if you want. I personally don't see the sense in that. If you're trailering a rig to and from the trailhead, you know, you can kind of get away with a little bit more stuff that's a lot more aggressive. But I personally think it's a good idea to look at tires like the Yokohama Geolander MTs, the Accelera MT-01, the BF Goodrich KM3. I think the KM3 is a great tire. It is on the heavy side, but it's one of the most durable mud terrains that I've ever looked at. You're also going to have tires like the Milestar Patagonia MT. You'll hear people talk about the weak sidewalls in that tire, but I've run a set and actually really like them. They work great in sand and rocks and other types of terrain. They did really good in the snow as well. You may also want to look at tires like the Hankook Dynapro MTs. They've got lots of different versions that they've come out with over the years, but whatever the current Hankook Dynapro is, they make a pretty good tire for the price. I've run some of their tires before, no problems, definitely a good value. You're also going to want to look at tires like the Cooper STT Pro, which is kind of a hybrid tire that does great on the highway, but also can definitely get down with the best of them once you hit the trails. Now, when it comes to maintenance with a mud terrain tire, there's a couple things that I think are substantially more important than with any other type of tire. Number one, make sure you're running a good air pressure in it. Make sure they're properly inflated. When you leave the trails, make sure that you inflate them back up to where they need to be. And there's going to be some debate here on what you should run. You could probably just run the OEM recommendation of what's on the inside of your door panel and the door jamb. You check that, see what the recommended pressure is. You can probably run that. One of the most accepted ways for finding the correct tire pressure with an off-road tire is going to be to do the chalk test, and there's lots of good tutorials on how to do that. Most off-road people will go by that as kind of the standard as to what tire pressure they should be running, because it is going to vary a little bit depending on the load rating of the tire, how much your vehicle weighs, and just different factors as to what the best tire pressure is. But until you decide to do that, or unless you just want to go real simple with it. Just run the OEM recommendations. It's probably going to be pretty close to what you would need, because you're not going to be running a tire that's real crazy bigger than what your Subaru came with. And then the next thing is, don't forget to do your tire rotations. You may want to check with the manufacturer as to what your rotation interval should look like. But a good rule of thumb that I like to use is just every other oil change, just rotate the tires. Don't forget that if you have a 5th full-size spare, rotate that in with it. Doing rotations by yourself is not that hard, or you can just take it, you know, to wherever you buy your tires from and have them do it. That's one of the best ways to make sure that your tires wear evenly and that you get the most amount of life out of them. If you neglect rotations, you'll absolutely chew through the tires much more quickly than if you keep up on them. It's hands down probably one of the best pieces of maintenance advice that I can give to you. Keep up on those rotations. The tires will thank you. They'll be more functional and have more grip for a lot longer than if you just run them. Guys, this is a very basic rundown of mud terrains. This is nowhere near being completely comprehensive, but I hope that this gives you an idea of what to look out for and what it's like to drive with mud terrain tires installed. It's not for everybody, but it's definitely something you can use to get an edge when you're out there on the trails in your Subaru. So if you got any questions, you know I definitely didn't cover everything. I make these videos on the spot. I don't script them, obviously. I'm just here talking to you the way that I would have a conversation with you in person. So it's inevitable that there's going to be things that I forget to hit on. If you have questions, hit the comments or check out the liftedimports.com website. Feel free to send us an email over there. If anything in this video has been helpful for you, if you want to see more content as it comes out, definitely subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video. That helps us out a lot. And until next time, we're going to see you out on the trails.